Hi, this is Jason Buss with Customer FX. Thanks for joining me today. Today I'll be talking about working with the entity model in SalesLogix Application Architect. So what is an entity? An entity is basically a business object which represents tables in the SalesLogix database, tables such as account, contact, opportunities, and other areas that you may already be familiar with. Through the entity model, you can define things such as business rules and methods, relationships, properties, and forms. Entities can be related to each other either through child relationships or extensions. In the Application Architect, in the Project Explorer, you can see a node here called Entity Model. If I expand this out, we have a few items in here: packages, relationships, code templates, and forms. We're going to be looking in the packages area, and in addition, we'll also be looking in the SalesLogix Application Entities. Basically, the different packages are organizational. They hold different entities related to different parts of SalesLogix. If we looked at activity support, for example, we'll see items like activity, events, history, and so on, user activity, and calendar and notifications. However, if we look in the application entities, we'll see items such as account, addresses, contact, and so on. This is sort of the main area that you'll probably be dealing with because this holds most of the main tables from SalesLogix represented as entities. If I expand the node for one of these entities, account for example, you'll see the different objects that exist within this account entity. We have items such as rules, properties, child properties, parent properties, extension entities, filters, and forms. And I'll go through each of these items in turn. Rules contain both business rule methods and events. These are code-based items that control various aspects of this entity. If we look at the business rule methods, we can see such items as can change owner, get opportunity stat, get subtype pick list name, and so on. These are pieces of functionality that get called in various areas on different forms and in the entity model itself to perform various different tasks. Events are related to specific events within the account entity. You can see we have here items such as on after insert, on before update, on create, and so on. If I expand out properties, you'll see that these actually represent the fields within the table represented by the entity. These items can be used in code to reference these particular fields, or they are used to map to a specific bound control. Okay, and in addition, we have child and parent properties. These are relationship items that relate entities to other entities. You can see here for account, we have a child property of contacts, meaning that account is the parent and contacts are the child in this case. If we expand out parent properties, you'll see top-level areas to account, and really in this area, that's just talking about owner. In addition, we also have an extension entities area. These represent one-to-one tables to the account entity in this case, basically extensions of that entity. And finally in here, the forms node, if I expand that out, these are the various different forms that exist for the account entity. For example, account details. If I double click on this, this will open up the quick form for account detail, which probably looks very familiar to you here. This is where we can select individual controls and then have access to the properties for those controls in order to modify their use. So now we'll get into a little bit how to create an entity in the Application Architect. First of all, I'm going to close out account details and get back to my Project Explorer. In order to create a new entity, there's two ways we can go about this. If we right-click on the SalesLogix Application Entities, we'll have an item here called New Entity. I'm going to go ahead and select that, and now we have two options. First of all is the option to create a business entity from an existing table. This will allow you to create an entity off of a table that already exists in SalesLogix. If you had created that in the LAN client, in Workgroup Administrator, or an Architect in the Database Manager, you could then go into the web environment here and then create an entity based off of that table that you'd already created. Otherwise, we have an option to create a business entity and a new table at the same time. This will do both steps. This will create the actual table in SQL, in our case here, and then we'll create the entity for that new table. In this case, I'm going to create a business entity and a new table. So I'll make sure that that's selected, and I'll go ahead and click Next. This will present us with the New Entity Wizard, which is the form that allows us to create a new entity from a new table. First of all, we're going to give it a display name. And in this case, I'm just going to create one called Test Entity. The name of that will default in, and the table name will default as well as Test Entity. You can change these at this point, but right now I'm going to leave the defaults. And I'm also going to leave Enable Field Level Security on. So go ahead and click Next. And now you have the option to relate this to an existing entity. In this case, I think I'm going to go ahead and turn that on, and we'll make this a one-to-many extension off of Account. So go ahead and select Account, and I'm going to create this as a one-to-many. And then you'll see some property details here. The display name of it will be called Test Entities. The property name is also Test Entities. The Test Entity property within Account, and these relate to the relationship that is going to be created between Account and our new Test Entity. So I'll just go ahead and accept the defaults for these and click Next. Now at this point, we're presented with the properties for the new entity that we just created. It's going to go ahead and build some basic ones for you. ID would be the primary key for that table. Since we've done a one-to-many to account, we have the account ID, which would be the child key in this table, and also the standard create user, date, and modify user and date fields. So now we can go ahead and add properties to the entity that we just created. The first one I'm going to create is, well, I'll click Add to create one, and it'll create sort of a blank property for me here, and I'll just set up the values for it. The first field I'm just going to call test value. The name will default, and we're going to go ahead and just keep it as a text data type and keep the length at 64, and we'll see that added that in here. Now I'm going to go ahead and add an additional property. Now I'm going to want to add a checkbox at some point, maybe in this case, so I'll want to add a Boolean in here. So I'm going to go ahead and call this test Boolean, and the name will default again, except this time I'm going to change the data type to a Boolean. Actually, I'm going to change this to a true-false. Now, I'm going to need to... Oh, it went ahead and did this for me. Once I click down here, it changed the data type to true-false and the length to 1, which is how SalesLogix deals with Booleans. Just as one more here, I'm going to add a numeric value. And in this case, I'm going to change the data type, and we'll make this one an integer. And that's about it. If I click down here again, it'll say integer and the length is 0. So that's good. And I'll go ahead and click Next on here as well. For the additional options, we have an entity display property. This is the item that will essentially display on the top of the screen in the web client. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to test value. No particular reason why I chose this one. We could really do anything. If we wanted to, we could also select an image for these entities. If you look in the entity model on the left here, you see like account that has a particular icon to represent accounts. Same with contact down here is a little guy there. This is where you would set that, and that would drive what shows up here in the entity model in the application entities in this tree. Items here such as account, product, and address, and so on, they have this kind of standard node-looking icon. That just means that nothing has been defined for those particular entities. I'm not going to set anything at this point, and I'm going to go ahead and click Next. Finally, here we're presented with sort of a validation or a confirmation screen, and it says what it's going to do, which is create an entity called Test Entity for the new table Test Entity. And I'll go ahead and click Next on here as well. And we can see it's going through the process of creating and saving this entity. We'll get some additional feedback. We can see on the left-hand side, it's actually created this already. And it created the schema and has told me now that it's successfully created the new entity. So go ahead and click Finish on this. And we can then, as soon as this finishes, it'll bring up the properties form for the new entity that we created. And we can see a couple items here. As we had already defined before, the name is test entity, display name is test entity. I'm going to go ahead and give this a plural display name of test entities. And we can see that our properties are here as they were defined, and everything looks as though it's set correctly. We have a couple different items on here. The description, you could add additional items if you would like. The code templates, basically, we won't get into these a whole lot in this, but these will default as inherited, and we'll just kind of leave it at that for now. The extension, the extended table, the string expression, again, this kind of drives what shows on the top of the screen when you look at this entity in SalesLogix, if we had created a portal page and everything for it. And we also have some change tracking here as well, where you can define where tracking history would be set. We don't actually have the set to track history, so there are no options here. SData is something that we'll get into in a further video. Basically, it allows web server access to data in SalesLogix. But again, we won't be playing with this a whole lot. We're going to leave it on because we'll probably come back to this at some point. So now we've basically created our entity. We can see by the little asterisk here that this needs to be saved. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now, if we want to actually use this entity in anything, we're going to need to do a build of the web platform. This will create the supporting files beneath the scenes to allow us to use this entity from other entities. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and it'll take a few minutes here to generate entity interfaces, and basically it's doing it for everything at this point. So this will take a couple minutes, and we'll pick up when this is finished. Okay, so actually I ran through the build of the web platform and threw an error at me saying that it failed to build. If I scroll up a little bit here in the output window, we can see where it seems to be having a problem. It's talking about the cannot implicitly convert a type string to a system date time. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is click on this this red line of text, this error, and this will actually open where it seems to be having the problem. And it looks like it's referring to the modified date value, and it's saying that it cannot implicitly convert type string to system date time. If I look at my entity, and I'm not sure if I just did this by sort of a misclick or if it did this by itself, but you can see here the modified date is set to a data type of text, which appears to be the problem. So I'm going to go ahead and just click this and change this back to a date time, like that, and go ahead and click OK. So now the value is date time, similar to what you would see like in create date as well. So I'm going to go ahead and save this change, and go ahead and close out this this code form, and I'm going to try to do another build. So I'll go ahead and run that, and again, we'll start up the video as soon as this is finished, and we'll see if my error has gone away. Okay, as we can see here now, the build has completed successfully. So now we have successfully created our test entity. I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and if we look here on the Project Explorer, I can now expand out this item, and it has the same sub items here as we had before. Rules in here, we haven't defined anything, so there's nothing showing up in the business rule methods. The events, these are the standard events that are there. You can tell by looking at the little lightning bolt icon on the left-hand side whether or not there's code defined for them or not. These are all gray, so there's nothing there in any of those. Close that out. If we look at the properties, we'll see the various different fields in here, including the items that we created, our test value, our test boolean, and our test number. Also, we have our child properties, which will have nothing in it because there are no children to this entity. However, in our parent properties, we're going to see a couple items: account, since we created this as a one-to-many under account, and also owner comes through there as well. Extension entities, nothing here because we don't have a one-to-one off of this entity that we created. Filters, again, we haven't defined anything yet, and we have not defined any forms. However, we can create all these items as you could in any other area. Like in Ticket, for example, this has a number of forms defined. And basically, to create any of these items, you can right-click on the item, and then in some cases there'll be a wizard, or you can just add them directly and make your modifications from there. To give you an idea of how to create these from existing tables, I'm going to go ahead and launch my SalesLogix Administrator. Go ahead and fire that up. And once that opens, I'll go ahead and I'll start up the Database Manager. This should all be very familiar to people who have done customizations in the LAN version of SalesLogix. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a new table. And we're just going to call this LAN test. And we're not going to have any association to this one. So we'll just set that as none. And we'll just leave this as is. Go ahead and click OK on this. And then we're just going to add a few test values. Test value 1. We'll do test value 2. Whoops. And then we'll do a test value 3. This test value 3 I'm going to create as a Boolean in order to test something that was an issue before. I'm going to see if it's still an issue in this version, and as soon as we get there I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I'll go ahead and save this, and then go ahead and apply these changes as well. So this will create my new table. Now this is just in the LAN client, so if I go into Worker Administrator, even if I refreshed, it's not going to show up in here. It's not available to us in Application Architect. So I'll go ahead back up to the top of my Application Entities package. And let me clean this up a little bit. So if I right click now, and I can go to New Entity, and in this case I'm going to say create a business entity from an existing table. So if I go ahead and hit Next, we can see these are basically all tables within SalesLogix that do not currently have a related entity defined for them in Application Architect. So if I scroll down, and we should see the item LAN test in here as well. So go ahead and select this box. You could do multiples at a time if you'd like, but this in this case we'll just do a LAN test. So go ahead and click Next, and it goes right to the verification screen saying that it will create entity for the existing table LAN test. So go ahead and click Next, and it will work on saving that entity for me. Again, we can see it's already created it in here, and it has successfully created that item. So I'll go ahead and click Finish, and this will open this up again, and we'll see what we did before. In this case, the fields that we had created, the display name, I'm not even going to set a plural name at this point. Now, if you recall, I had added that third test value as a Boolean value. This still seems to be an issue in version 8. As it brought it in, you can see it creates it as a text field. You're going to want to keep an eye on things like that because this will cause an error when you try to build this entity. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to a true-false. Whoops, not a URL, but a true-false field. So that should avoid any issues that we have when we build the web platform using this new entity. So I'll go ahead and save this. And once again, I'm going to do a build of the web platform. Okay, looking at it now, we can see that the build has completed successfully. So we currently have 2 new entities in the system. Our first one that we had created, and then this new one called LAN test, which we added from an existing table in SalesLogix. So go ahead and close this out. So now that we have our entities created, we can use those to create forms and relationships and basically any functionality that we would like to create in SalesLogix. So hopefully that'll give you a good overview of what entities are and how to create those in SalesLogix. We've looked at a couple different ways of doing those. In a future video, we'll start using these different concepts to build an actual functional application. But at this point, I'm hoping that this will give you a good general overview of what an entity is and what purpose it serves in the application architect.